Vince Cable, thank you very much for agreeing to do this very short interview for the Commonwealth Conversation. As someone who used to work in the Commonwealth Secretariat, you know the association very well. What do you think of the Commonwealth's greatest strengths?
Well, I did, as you say, work in the Secretariat roughly between 1983 and 1990. It was a sort of period when the Commonwealth and the Secretariat had a very high profile, mainly because of Sonny Ramphal's personal role as Secretary General, and because issues like apartheid, the Commonwealth was giving leadership on, and it was an exciting time to be there, and that was a very positive experience for me personally. I think the strengths were the diversity. It wasn't just sort of rich and poor countries, but it was big and small, every part of the world, but with some common bonds, not least English language and a lot of the traditions which come from the sort of shared history. So I think that was the great strength. It was its diversity, and the fact that nonetheless within this diversity there were very good networks in my case in terms of economic policy groups, finance ministers and central bankers, but educationally and in many other fields, and it was a very, very strong, fine organisation that perhaps hasn't been given the credit it deserves.
As an institution in the early 90s, it had issues. On the 80s, it had issues like apartheid. In the 80s, it worked on climate change, some of the forefront of its field. Now, the Commonwealth, some people say, is without a main purpose. Is there an issue for you which you think the Commonwealth should focus on in the 21st century?
I don't think there is a single issue. There was an emotional issue around apartheid, which in a way was one of the kind of extreme manifestations of the colonial mentality that found its extreme form in South Africa. But that sort of era has gone mercifully, and so there isn't a single issue to cluster around it quite that way. I think the big issue actually is that it comes out of this recession is sort of global interconnectedness. We all depend on each other. But there aren't proper forums, really, for dealing with this. We have the traditional, the United Nations, absolutely essential, a bit bureaucratic. The IMF and the World Bank, which are struggling to find a role. The World Trade Organization, which is finding difficult to make headway. You have the G20, which is the nearest approximation we have now to a system of international governance that is struggling to find its feet. And I think to have an organisation which has very good networks, which is a forum, which does represent everybody, big countries and small, rich and poor, I think that's the niche. It's finding mechanisms for keeping an interconnected system alive so that we don't all retreat into nationalism, and the Commonwealth has a big role there. So
moving on to the CHOGM finally, at the end of November, on this issue of the financial crisis and a worldwide recession, what message would you give to the Commonwealth and to Commonwealth world leaders in their communique?
Well, I think the big message is not looking inward. There's a great temptation, faced with the economic crisis, to look inward. It's even very outward-looking countries like the UK. We've become a bit self-obsessed. There are very strong protectionist tendencies in different parts of Europe, Japan, United States, China, and that's got to, that can ultimately be disastrous because it would take us down the same road we had in the 1930s. So I think the key message is recognising that we're interdependent, staving off economic nationalism. If they can make a contribution to that, then they will have served a very useful purpose.
Vince Cable, thank you very much.
Thank you.